Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is one of the nation's leading experts in career transition for veterans and public service professionals. He coaches individuals on their transition efforts and advises employers on hiring programs designed to successfully assimilate these valuable talent pools. He's the author of the award-winning and best-selling book, Mission Transition, a practical guide for veterans, their families, and their employers. His second book, Hiring Veterans, a practical guide for organizational leaders on how to build programs to successfully assimilate veteran and military spouse talent. He holds an MBA in Operations and Finance from the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University, a BS in Mechanical Engineering from West Point, and is a graduate of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. He is also the President of Purepost, the optimal means for matching talent to available roles in the U.S. economy. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Matthew Lewis.
Well, Julia, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to the conversation and sharing whatever guidance and lessons that I've learned along the journey.
Although I can tell the answer from your resume, Matthew, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, given the topic on which I focus, which is eliminating the civil-military divide in the country, and we can get into peeling back some of the layers on that, I didn't find I was sufficiently competent to author anything on that subject until I had lived the experience. And so a lot of that was spent simply understanding what it meant to be on both sides of the divide, and gained sufficient lessons learned such that I could offer some guidance for each side of the divide and how to approach the other. Just to break that down a bit, when I mention the civil-military divide, I can bore you with lots of slides and statistics, but on the military side, which was the first book, Mission Transition, the red book that I held up before, it's a practical guide to help our service members realize full employment following their time in service. Lots of reasons why that's important. And I had to live that experience, which I did. I spent 25 years in a uniform of some sort, combination of active and reserve duty. But then the other half of the divide is for what we call the civil side of the divide, for organizations and how they should optimally approach veterans and military spouses in successfully assimilating them into their organizations and their cultures. And just as I spent 25 years in a uniform of some sort, I've spent 25 years in counting in the corporate space, and mostly large blue chip sorts of organizations, but all of whom have had a devotion to veterans and have had successful programs. So using those and others that I've included as case studies as a means to shine a light for the balance of the economy, and there's a significant portion of the economy that doesn't have a veteran hiring program today. So it's largely has to do with having the learned experience. I guess the last point I would add an answer to that question is getting sufficiently upset that I actually bothered to put pen to paper, which is somewhat of a story in and of itself. The abbreviated version is when I left active duty many moons ago, there was very little by way of support to help our service members successfully transition to optimal employment. So necessity being the mother of invention, I came up with my own process. And veterans being who they are, I reached back and helped my peers as they were leaving service themselves. Inevitably, they would land more successfully than they would have otherwise. And I got two points of feedback along the way. One was a message of gratitude, but the other was, hey, there's tens, hundreds of thousands of people leaving the service every year. Have you thought about scaling what you do? To which I would always scoff because I got a D in English my plebe or freshman year at West Point. I'm probably the last person that should be writing books. But fast forward a couple decades, and now I have classmates, blood brothers and sisters leaving the service that have devoted their and their families' entire adult lives to service to the country. And in spite of the fact that there's been lots of funding and support, both via the government as well as veteran service organizations, nonprofit orgs, in support of those service members that didn't exist when I was there, these American heroes, really what they are still left largely fending for themselves, sad to report. And so that was the spark, if you will, that actually caused me to take up the suggestion, the long ago suggestion, and often reaffirmed over the years to actually start putting pen to paper. So long-winded answer, but that's kind of the story behind why and how I didn't get started until I turned 50.
Well, first of all, thank you for your service. And it looks like you're continuing that leadership to the veterans who are leaving the military and re-entering civilian life. And you would think it is a no-brainer for companies to hire veterans. What is usually the stumbling block?
Well, you're exactly right. And if you don't mind, I will share a slide just to give you a sense of what some of those stumbling blocks are, as well as the real need, frankly, for why I find this to be so important for our nation writ large. So I know those of you on audio, I'll try to talk you through this. Those of you on video will see this. First, let me start with why. Why focus here? Why is this important? At this day and age, whether you realize it or not, those of you who follow the news may have seen some of these things. We're really facing on a national level what I would call a security crisis. You may have noted within the past year, all of the services, save the Marine Corps, have not met their recruiting goals. The Army, which is our largest service, has missed it 2 years running by significant margins, so much so that they've had to reduce their physical presence. And to boot, surveys show that only 9% of our youth today would desire to serve within the military. Now, add to that the suicide rate, which has more than doubled over a little more than the past decade, but continues unabated. And that perhaps potentially driving unemployment rates. More than half of post 9/11 vets today, which is the generation that's leaving the military today, are going to be unemployed on average of 22 weeks. And almost 2/3 of their jobs aren't in their chosen career field. They job hop and they job hop and they job hop, so much so that half of them are still not in their preferred career for by their sixth post-military job. It's an incredibly sustained rate of failure. Doesn't help them, doesn't help their families, doesn't help their employers. And it all comes back to root cause. They're not optimally positioned, don't go through the process for which I advocate in the first book, to approach that really life change, the first time in their adult lives that they'll be taking off the uniform and having to fill that blank sheet with who do I want to be when I grow up. So that has much to do with the why. And let me scroll down here to what some of the other hurdles are and how veterans may serve to add some benefits to organizations that are wise enough to take advantage of them. I mentioned in response to my earlier question about how a good many organizations are not taking advantage today. Here's some statistics to that end. Small businesses, which make up 99% of the businesses in the country, tend to not have programs in place. In fact, the U.S. Chamber, if we believe what they tell us, 90% of small businesses don't have veteran hiring programs in place. If we look at large organizations, if we believe what Korn Ferry tells us, 80% of them don't have veteran hiring programs in place. So it's a missed opportunity because veterans bring to bear exactly what our civilian leaders tell us is required. Surveys of HR leaders tell us that the business values of veterans are such that they end up being promoted faster, perform better, and easier to manage than their civilian equivalents in the real world. And that's not to make an us versus them argument out of this. It's simply shining a light on the opportunity that does exist. To your point around hurdles, and I'll just quickly run through some statistics here. A lot of the issue has to do with stereotypes and overcoming them of individuals, 99.5% of whom have not served on active duty at any time post 9/11. They just don't understand who veterans are, what they bring to bear. It can part of the nature of the civil military divide. And so some misnomers that I'll quickly dispel here. One of them is around veterans not being sufficiently educated. Well, depending on what measuring stick you use, that's not quite the case. If we use high school degree as a measuring stick, veterans are more educated. If we look at those that have a graduate or other advanced degree, veterans are actually 160% more likely to have a graduate or advanced degree. And by the way, veterans with bachelor's degrees have 3 times more work experience than non-veterans. And there's the detailed statistics that prove it. I won't bore you with it. It's available on my website. There's another misnomer out there that if you're a veteran, you were, as we say in the military, a trigger puller, meaning everyone served in a combat specialty and had PTSD. I'll tackle that one in a moment. Fact of the matter is less than 15% of people served in a combat capacity. There's your statistics. Let's flip that around. 85% have served in a capacity that's directly accredited to their functional equivalent in the real world. Now, mention of PTSD. Again, there's this stereotype out that all veterans suffer from that. Fact of the matter is, and you can peel back the statistics, the math in the bottom right corner of this, pretty much if I take a notional 1,000-person organization, you will have 5 times more non-veterans that have PTSD in it than veterans do. And it's a treatable malady, if I can call it that, regardless of who has it. Just a few other things here. There's a question about military not being very diverse. The fact of the matter, it's a strength of the military. Military is made up of 31% of racial and ethnic minorities. They, in some instances, I would argue, should be the heart of any DEI program that's out there. I know that's been a subject of contention and debate in the media lately, but I think a way for those that advocate for DEI programs, a way to enable it to sustain itself is to put veterans at the heart of the programs if they aren't today. There's misnomers out there about disabilities, which aren't true. There's misnomers out there about veterans not being available. What I hear from employers all the time is, I would really like to hire veterans, but I don't know where to look. Fact of the matter, there's 200,000 matriculating from the service every single year, and they're available year round, unlike individuals coming off of college campuses who do so at the end of specific semesters or whatever academic schedule they're on. There's pushbacks around having individuals in the Guard or the Reserve, and I have no power over this. Again, it's false. All employers have rights to limit the impact of recalls from the Guard or the Reserve. And then quantifiable outcomes is really the big one, kind of bottom line up front. Here's what you get bang for your buck when you hire veterans. First, understand from, assuming you're a for-profit entity and you're trying to embellish your brand and have people buy into that, the nation's military community, and I use that term broadly to include families, comprises 37 million folks that wield 1.2 trillion in buying power. And again, studies tell us that organizations that have diverse and inclusive talent management approaches that include veterans realize 22% higher productivity, 13 times higher mean cash flow, 4 times better able to deal with personnel problems, 3 times more likely to identify and build leaders. And so I think I'll end it there. Actually, one last point, if you will. Again, the myth is that hiring veterans has no impact. Again, we started with the fact that this is a national security crisis. I'll end where I started. Fact of the matter is, if military service is not seen by prospective enlistees today, 16, 17-year-olds, if they don't see today's veterans coming out of the military landing successfully from an employment standpoint, in a sense, why would I raise my hand assuming I'm wise enough at that age to see what the potential end state could be? So again, it's a matter of national security. The last point I'll make on this is, if veterans aren't employed, guess who pays the unemployment bill? It comes directly from the Department of Defense, from their operating budget, meaning that takes funds directly away from funds that would otherwise go to supporting and training our troops and providing for our common defense. So again, veterans writ large bring to bear the exact sorts of skills that our civilian leaders are needed to be successful in their organizations.
Well, I just feel, in my limited knowledge of the subject, that our students today in high school need to have more marketing programs that talk to them about joining the military, because I mentor a young lady in high school and I've talked to her about entering the military. But, today's kids want to know, what does it do for me? And they don't realize what an impact being in the military could be on their lives and their careers, and what the benefits are of military service.
That's right. Untold benefits. You grow up very quickly and mature very quickly. As I noted in the slides I just walked you through, you will quickly gain experience, training, education in functional capacities that are directly accredited to organizations outside of the military. By and large, again, I'll throw out the 85% figure. That positions you to compete effectively. Now, there will always be a learning curve, if you will, within whatever organizations that you land. But you would leave the military with a skill set that you probably don't fully appreciate at the time. The other big, I don't want to refer to it as a barrier, but the other main thing with which you'll need to contend in coming out is the culture of the organization that you ultimately join. And in the last 2 chapters of, I call it my red book, Mission Transition, I break that down to various cultural dimensions and try to help the individual understand that because they spent their entire adult life up to that point in a military culture, and I define what that is in its various dimensions, and how that's going to change in each of those dimensions almost all simultaneously upon landing in that organization. That's the other thing that most folks are unaware of and will need to contend with. So that's a big part of it as well.
When you published your first book, what led to the next book? Were there still topics you hadn't covered, or did you hear from your readers that they needed additional material?
Actually, Julia, when I started sitting down to write, what ended up being 2 books, I intended to be 1 book. And we'll talk later about it, advice to others, but one of those things is to network with other authors and get some readership of your drafts along the way and some feedback. And one of those valuable pieces of feedback I got as I was going through my manuscript was that, wow, wait a minute, you've already got enough for a book here. Have you thought about breaking this down and making it more consumable by 2 different audiences, because they really are focused on different audiences. So really that was the main answer there. Again, the focus was on eliminating the civil military divide, and I thought I could tackle that in 1 book, but at the end of the day, it made a lot more sense to break it down into 2.
Whether an author is published by the Big Five or a small press or self-published, the challenges for publicity are still the same. How are you getting the word out about your books, or is there any publicity that's worked for you or that hasn't worked?
Some more so than others. And I've not, while I've investigated the potential of leveraging a publicist, I've not. I have leveraged whatever publicity assets that my publishers would allow. And just to be upfront with who they are, Mission Transition, and I'll hold up the book again as a reminder. Mission Transition, the Red Book, was published by HarperCollins Leadership in 2019. And my new book, Hiring Veterans, was published by Career Press just this past September 2023. And it's been an interesting journey because each publisher is obviously a different business, different people, and approach their support of authors in different ways. And there's been pros and cons, I'll just say, with each of them in terms of the packages that they offer authors. And I've tried to take full advantage of what I can. The other thing that I've gone through on this topic is just a learning curve of my own. Being a first-time author, I approached the second book with a lot better understanding and knowledge about how to go about this than I did with the first book. Just one example, award programs that are out there and which ones are seen by audiences and those in the industry as being more valuable than others, and when and how to apply for those and who should apply for those, whether it's the publisher or myself. So those are all things, just considering the publisher. And then there's untold amounts of things that you can do on your own. And frankly, that's really where most of the effort around publicity ends up. It falls on the author's shoulders, and certainly those that self-publish, or for the small houses where there's less resources. And I mean, even for me, even though you might consider those larger houses, still the majority of the work, if not many days, the totality of the work tends to fall on my shoulders. And so for me, that takes the form of direct outreach with individuals in my network, targeted individuals that I'd like to reach out to. This would include, I mean, it's somewhat obvious given the topic of the books. But in terms of vehicles, I found LinkedIn to be more valuable in terms of getting the word out, both via my direct pushes as well as membership with some groups that are related to the topics on which I write. A little less so with Facebook, even less so with X or Twitter and Instagram. So there's various channels. Another avenue that I utilize is a newsletter that I try to publish probably every other. I'm down to about an every other month cadence. Whereas when I started out, it was about a monthly cadence, and I found there to be less of an appetite for that. And I try to balance within the newsletter news, just in terms of an update to those within my network, as well as valuable points, lessons, little snippets from each of the book that might be of use of value to individual readers. So that's been a useful vehicle as well.
Well, speaking of snippets, let's hear a little bit about the passages you brought to share today, and then you read from your book so that we can hear your tone and voice.
Okay, let's do that. We'll start with Mission Transition, and I'm going to pull from the introduction on both of the books. And what I'd like to do in doing so is just to give folks a sense of, again, why I focused where I focused, and a peeling back the onion, maybe just one layer on each of these topics and why they're important. So let me start with Mission Transition. I begin the introduction with a quote from President Dwight D. Eisenhower on the challenges that the soldiers about to storm Normandy Beach has faced, and I equate that to the challenges that today's veterans face coming out of the military. And so here's the quote. It's not a stretch to say that the challenge you face today, overcoming the ever-growing civil-military divide to secure full employment, is not all that different in stature from that collectively faced by the Allied Expeditionary Force in early June of 1944. Does that sound far-fetched? Well, consider some facts. There are thousands of you transitioning out of the service. After more than a decade of repeated deployments and combat experience, more than 200,000 of you matriculate into the civilian workforce annually. Most of you are transitioning without a safety net. The Department of Defense tells us that more than 2/3 of you will transition short of retirement without a pension. Civilians, those who would hire you, do not share and thus do not understand your military experience. Approximately 99.5% of the American public has not served on active duty at any time since 9/11. Only 8% of U.S. adults are veterans, and that percentage is going to decrease by a third by 2043. A rapidly shrinking percentage of leadership in the corporate world shares your background. A study found a nearly 90% drop between 1980 and 2006 in the number of publicly held corporations whose CEO had a military background. The Wall Street Journal reports this percentage to now be 2.6. Even if you expand that shot group to include all S&P 500 board members, the percentage with military background is still less than 5. And adding insult to injury, many of you will enter the civilian world unprepared. Only a little more than half of veterans surveyed agreed or strongly agreed that they were well prepared to successfully navigate or transition from military to civilian life. And consequently, every year, there are tens of thousands of you entering the civilian marketplace without a safety net in a world that may not understand you, whose leaders likely don't share your background, and for which you may be unprepared. How does that strike you? So that sets the stage for the individual service member and tries to paint a brief snapshot of the true hurdle that they have to overcome. Now, one quick quote here from the second book, Hiring Veterans, again, a practical guide to help organizations put programs in place to successfully assimilate veterans and military spouses, again, from the introduction. And here I start with a quote from President Teddy Roosevelt, where he spoke about people being given a square deal for those that have shed their blood for their country. And so picking up from there, it reads as follows. Teddy could not have foreseen the civil military gap in the country when he made that statement more than 100 years ago, but I'm not sure it would have changed his sentiment. He's obviously talking about veterans, both male and female, and I would contend that by a square deal, he's referring to full employment. He also states that all veterans should at least have that opportunity, but nothing more. It's a grand notion. But how did President Roosevelt's sentiment stand up against today's world? Do today's employers accept his premise? Why should they? What is it about today's veterans that should justify full employment? And even with that justification, how should employers bring this talent on board their organizations? One more paragraph. This book addresses these important questions. Let's start with why. For starters, it's good business. Consider the nation's military community comprises approximately 37 million individuals who wield 1.2 trillion in annual buying power. Establishing a good reputation among this group would bear significant benefits. Even more importantly, veteran employment is critical to both the national economy and the country overall. Although veterans only make up 8% of the nation's adult population, just more than 6% of the civilian labor pool, they have an outsized influence over the future of the country's all-volunteer force that defends our freedom, protects our liberty, and enables capitalism to thrive. If military service is not seen as providing a gateway to successful civilian careers, future participants in the nation's all-volunteer military may be dissuaded from serving. It is thus a matter of national security. The success of veterans after service and the positive perception of veterans as assets to their employers and communities is vital to the success of our military. Moreover, the Department of Defense must pay unemployment compensation for ex-service members to states whose veterans are not employed. These funds, whose amounts have varied between $200 and $900 million in recent years, subtract from the DoD's operating budget and thereby sacrifice funds that would otherwise be spent on our common defense. The bottom line, everyone wins when you hire veterans. So,
amen to that. My husband owned large businesses, and if a resume came across his desk that had military service on it, it went to the top of the stack. So I encourage everyone to look at our military and to choose them.
Amen to that.
Do you have any other books in you?
I may. We'll see. I've been toying around with a project. I happen to grow up across the street from a National High School Hall of Fame coach who was very instrumental to my father's success in his life and many others of his generation that happened to play for him or be associated with him. And he's long since departed. And I just see a need for the kinds of lessons he tried to instill in the young men that he coached and mentored over many years. Very much a need for that today's world. So one thought is to attempt to document that in some way, shape, or form, the principles which he espoused, and find a way to instill that in today's generation in some way, shape, or form. So that's a project that's been swimming around in my head for some time, and trying to put some meat on those bones and make it something that people would consume in this day and age is something I continue to struggle with.
Well, this has been a very chilling and honest interview today, talking about our military and what may the future hold for our military. So I appreciate your being here with us today. And as always, our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite a unique group. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Well, thank you, Julia. One, for having me on today, but two, for the broader mission and purpose you serve here. I know you reap no windfall from doing these podcasts. It's your gift to the community. And so, speaking perhaps on the rest of us authors out there, very grateful and thankful for what you do. So thank you. To your question, what I tell people, and perhaps I think most people feel this way, regardless of what age they are, is it's just a number. As I tell all the veterans that I work with, we each of you is unique, and you each bring something to bear that's of value, that has a fit to somewhere in the world. And because I focus on employment with some employer out there. And so another gentleman whose podcast I've appeared on previously, to borrow his phrase, it's time for all of you to sing your song and to have your voice be heard. And when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, not to be morbid, but try to put a positive outlook on things. We all have one life to live. And so whatever it is you have in your heart, in your mind that you want to get out, let's get on with it. And let's get it down and get it out there, because if you think it's important, there will surely be other people out there that believe it's important as well, and will put it to use in their lives. So that's certainly why I have done what I've done, to try to improve the nation, the economy writ large. And time will tell if that's the outcome that it has, but that's certainly my hope and prayer.
Matthew, we so appreciate your being with us today. It's encouraging to me to hear about our veterans finding success in civilian life, and we owe so much to our military families and the sacrifices that they've made for us. So thank you for clearing paths for them into secondary careers. And now we're happy to count you among our authors over 50.
Thanks so much, Julia.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.